we might be a misinformation super consumer, but we don't have to be an information super spreader. The data around how bad we are at telling, real from fake when it comes to AI stuff is truly terrifying. This world where if I believe it strongly enough, it becomes quote unquote my truth. In the presence of debate or disagreement, we can't help but feel like we're under assault. Our opinions and our beliefs aren't the truth.
Thank you for coming, Dom.
Thank you for having me.
How do you feel today?
I feel absolutely brilliant this morning, but it's been a great morning. I'm feeling very good. Yeah.
Getting ready for this, it became fairly clear that you probably would have been identified early on as like, oh, young Dom thinks a lot. How old were you when you kind of realised that you thought about the world differently? And was it you, or was it your folks, or was it your teachers?
It was quite early. When I was in year 1 or 2, I think, I came home from school and I'd be given an award, like little primary school and so you get ones, here's for achievement, this one's for, little Johnny's done well with reading, Susan's learner timetables. Mine was an award for keeping the office staff entertained, because I would go into the office and just like have stories about interesting things I'd heard or jokes that my older siblings had told me from high school that I would take into the office stuff.
Right.
And so pretty early on, I think people had me pegged as someone who was just kind of saw the world in a different way and liked telling stories about it.
So you're 6 years old and you're engaging adults who have got no time for children on their break.
Yeah, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you've also got, by the sounds of things, older siblings. Are you from a big family?
No, a very, very small family, but with a big age gap. I was very much the surprise. My brother is 10 years older than me. My sister is 8 years older than me. And Mum was 40 when I was born.
Oh, so Mum and Dad have pulled the goalie going, this is it, don't worry about it,
Yeah,
we're fine. And hello.
Yeah.
Did it ever cause you issue, like, there's people in my life who are like brain the size of a planet kind of people. And one of the things I had to figure out was to not be mad that everybody else doesn't get it as fast as them.
Oh, that's a really lovely question. But I've never, and I think this is still to this day, I just work from the presumption that I'm the stupidest person in every room that I'm in. That, like, genuinely, I don't. So no, it's not been it makes me very curious. I think to when I wind up in conversation with people who see the world like on a fundamentally different way to me. But I think as a general rule, my response is normally curiosity, except in a very narrow band of situations where I feel like I'm in the presence of people who are taking on positions, either like attitudes or beliefs or opinions about the world that are really doing harm to people. Like, right. I struggle with those conversations when I'm like, this isn't just that I think you're wrong, it's that I feel like you're having quite a negative impact on the world around you.
But you were always kind of the youngest guy in the room for a lot of your life.
Yeah.
Right.
Very much so.
What was that like? Certainly when you left high school and...
Yeah. So I started my first company when I was 23, and we were doing business with very, very senior people. So certainly by that point, I was quite literally the youngest person in most of those rooms. My business partner was also only 25. So we were very young for the work we were doing. But I've always gravitated towards, I think it's because of the sibling age difference. I've always gravitated towards people older than myself, which I think, at a school age sometimes caused problems. I was quite badly bullied at the start of high school. I think most people have stories like that. And I think part of it was I think I was often not very good at relating to people who are my own age, because I spent so much time around older people. And so that caused me some problems early on. But I've always been very motivated by ideas. And I think I was always finding that just typically people who are a bit older than me had the most interesting ones. Yeah.
What was it that drew you towards behaviour change as a thing to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I've been obsessed with that for quite a long time. Part of it was I've been with my partner now, Emily, for I think 19 years this year, and she's a behavioral neuroscientist. And so part of it was she kind of got me into the world of behavior in a way. Professionally, I fell into it. The work that we did in my first company that I started was around generational change, and then it became more organizational change. And we realized that you really can't accomplish much without being able to change human behavior. The saying we always used to use was, "There's no change without behavior change." And I've heard you speak about this so compellingly yourself in the past around like the realization of what happens when you understand that you have levels of control and that you're able to affect your own outcomes, that self-efficacy, which you just speak so incredibly compellingly about. But I think I realized, certainly in the early years of my businesses, that if you can't change behavior, you find it very hard to change anything. It's kind of the first door you need to learn to be able to crack to change all the other things. And so it was almost professional necessity that started getting me obsessed with it.
We've seen times where where circumstances change, or shall we say, the facts of the matter change, yet behavior is still coupled to the previous set of facts. I'm fascinated to know, at what point do we just go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and now nobody uses a Nokia? Or at what point do we go, yeah, I know, you want us to do that, but you know what? Have your 5K lockdown bubble and get fucked.
Yeah.
Because I need to see my girlfriend.
Yeah. So for me, I think the most empowering way to view that was this realization that most of the time people are just doing the thing that's easiest, and that we'll give incredibly compelling rationalizations for why we do things, and we'll write the most comprehensive stories in our heads about that explain all the reasons we took a particular course of action. But the overwhelming majority of the times, in most situations, we're just doing the thing that's easiest. And so people migrate away from the Nokia when migrating away from the Nokia is easier than not migrating away from the Nokia. To use that, like to run that example out to its kind of logical extent, either that gets so out of date that they're not interoperable with their friends anymore, there's a new piece of technology they really want and they can't, like a new app they want to use, and they can't use old one anymore, they almost migrate out of necessity. But the notion that the overwhelming majority of times people simply follow the path of least resistance, once you start seeing the world like that, it just explains so much of human behavior. It's like, even there was this, you probably would have seen it, there's this insane study out of Canada that looked at doctors' hand washing habits, and they were like, it's training doesn't make them wash their hands, signs don't make them wash their hands, like reminding them that they're killing patients by spreading diseases doesn't make, but you make the sink closer. And the difference between most doctors washing their hands and most doctors not washing their hands was 7 meters of sink distance. It's like they won't walk an extra 7 meters to save a patient's life. And these are specialist, highly trained infectious disease doctors. Yeah. You put the sink around one corner and about 70% of doctors wash their hands. You put it around 3 corners, 0% of doctors wash their hands. It's like, it's just this notion of we're just... My wife has this beautiful phrase where she says humans are ease-seeking missiles, where we just, from an evolutionary perspective, we just gravitate towards paths of least resistance, which also gives you the golden rule of behavior change, right? Don't try to convince people something's important, just make it easy. If we can make the desired behavior easier than the current behavior, people just do it.
Solar panels on rooftops is the key. Yeah. I was having this conversation just the other day. I know a bloke, he lives over there in Maroubra. He got his solar system put on by BP, which are the like industrial scale people. Yeah. So we're the only people doing it because it was like mining, outposts and stuff. Yeah. It cost him like $110,000 or $120,000 in 1993, and it's 4 kilowatts or something. Yeah. All right, but he got it on principle because like, no, this is what I have to do. No one's going to do that. No one's going to put the cost. It was like the cost of his house back then. Now, you could get 4 kilowatts for probably $3,000 with a battery, maybe maybe $6,000 with a battery. Yeah. It's there because it's cheaper. Yeah. And it's easier than paying power bills. Yeah. It's free.
Yeah.
That's it.
And the complexity of installing them has gone down. They take up less space. Like just barrier after barrier getting removed, and all of a sudden you see the adoption curve.
So everyone should get vaccinated, and the climate crisis is over. Thanks for coming, Dom.
I feel like we've solved it, guys.
It's over. So a couple of weeks ago on the show, we had a guy who two of his books are really transformational for me. A guy by the name of Dr. Steven Pinker, incredible Canadian.
Yeah.
And
Brilliant.
his latest work is about common knowledge. All right, when we all know what we all know, that we all know it, that we know a truth, and we know that they know a truth, and they know that we know that truth. We now have a truth. So there's literally three sides to a thing that has to exist. Why? What role does that kind of truth play in our community, and why is it so important?
Yeah. Firstly, Pink is a genius. Yeah. What you identify there, this notion of there's there is this thing that exists outside of us in the middle, and it is the truth, and we all have perspectives on it, we all have views on it, we come from different positions, but we need to develop a shared understanding and a shared set of beliefs about that truth, but also then, as you articulate that understanding, that everyone else also knows that we know, and we have those conversations.
Money is a great example. It's, in our country, for a long time, it's just a piece of plastic, right? It doesn't mean anything until I decide it means something, you decide it means something, and you and me and the other person who makes something decide it means something. Now it means something.
Yeah.
It doesn't even exist now.
Yeah.
It's dots and code on a hard drive somewhere in a server farm where my bank account lives. But it's a story in my head that I know is true, you know is true, and whoever I'm paying my power bill to knows is true.
It's an agreement.
It is.
Money is an agreement.
Truly is.
Just to go down this rabbit hole very briefly, it's interesting that as money has become more and more abstract, right?
Yeah.
And it's gone from notes and coins, which you can kind of feel and pick up and carry on. It's like the more I've got in my hand, the more money I've got.
Yeah.
To cards, where it's like, well, the card's the same regardless of how much money, now through to completely invisible. It's drastically changing the way we think about and relate to money. The invisibilization of it so. For instance, you'll if you're spending on a digital wallet versus a credit card versus cash, you'll buy more on a credit card and you'll make less healthy choices. Credit cards, physically, when you spend using them, they don't activate the pain receptors, the loss centers of your brain, as much as physical currency do, because you're not handing stuff over and giving it away. These little structural changes in the way we relate to the concept, it makes you buy less healthy stuff when you're these tiny little cues in the environment that shift behavior. But it's also making kids, it's really hard to teach kids now about money. So you go in and you talk to little kids about, like, where does money come from? And they would give answers like, well, money, they used to say money comes out of the wall, right?
Yeah.
Money comes from the wall because you go to the ATM and and then they'd say money comes from shopping. And you'd be like, what do you mean money comes from shopping? They'd be, well, because I go to the shops with mum and dad, and then we go to the checkout and mum and dad hand over a card and they get their card and cash back. So money comes from shopping. And now you ask them, where does money come from? And they just go, what's money?
Amazing.
Like there's complete lack of physical. So yeah, but from a behavior perspective, tiny structural changes that make these huge differences in understanding.
But when we don't have that agreed story at the center of a community decision, whether it be about money or healthcare or national security or immigration or education,
vaccination,
or rules of the road, what happens? Why is truth so important in a community?
Yeah. So my simple statement is that shared problems require shared solutions. And if we can't agree on what's true, then we can't agree on anything else. And so if you think about, for me, and what I discuss in my new book on this is, if you think about the way that we all as people are just kind of navigating through this shared space together, there are a few facts about that space, right? So one of them is that the world exists outside of our opinions and preferences, right? There is a world, it is out there, it exists in a particular configuration, and it exists that way regardless of our personal feelings and emotions, right? So it's possible to be right about things, it's possible to be wrong about things, but the world exists independent of our own opinions. And so every time we come together to discuss the world, we basically have to learn to agree on how things are before we can agree on how we want them to be. If you don't agree on how things are, you can't possibly agree on how you want them to be. And so this kind of fracturing that we've seen, I think, into a world where it's almost like Oprah Winfrey rewrote 300 years of epistemology, and now it's like, and you get a truth, and you get a truth, and you get a truth, and everyone just gets their own truth.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to find my truth and stand in my truth. Can feel very emotionally appealing, but it basically makes it impossible to come up with shared solutions to real problems. It's a world where we all retreat into our own little truthdoms, where we get to stand in our own beliefs and our own truth without ever having to step across the aisle and bridge out to find the space that's in the middle. And so it just becomes impossible to solve problems.
Because we kind of avoid the discomfort of acceptance around one of the things that's real for us, making life difficult for either us, our family, or somebody else, by going, well, that's just you, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
We avoid the discomfort of the adaptation and adjustment that throughout humanity we've had to do so we can get along and live together, because if we don't have each other, we can't survive. Yeah. And that's rough. What I found interesting in your book, the idea that truth is a fractal, and I'm not talking about the things projected on the walls at raves I went to in Brisbane in the early 90s. In that,
although I'm sure I saw some truth in those.
Yeah. You saw something.
Yeah.
And
felt true at the time.
I was trying to pronounce Mandelbrot, but I couldn't. I found it so fascinating that the fundamental patterns of what makes people be truthful or to tell a lie are kind of the same on an interpersonal level, to maybe a community level, to a company level, to a state, to a global level. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk about how that is, the things that either make the truth or the lie show up. How can they be true between perhaps you and I, between you and me and my wife upstairs, we chatted before we came down here, or between like everyone at school pick up this afternoon?
Wonderful question. I love that fractal analogy. That I kept
also,
going.
You're a world debating champion. You just said wonderful question, so I'm retiring.
Well, and I'm being honest because I literally wrote a book about
True.
it. So
yep, absolutely.
Although, am I? I guess
That's beautiful.
I guess we'll never know.
Champagne.
Well, yeah, because we can get to the bit in a second where it doesn't matter how long you talk about the truth, we're all subject to the same forces, so I'm probably lying just as much as everyone else, which some studies would suggest is 60% of us lying, roughly speaking, at least once every 20 minutes, which is...
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Come back to it.
So fractals. So the what I outline in the book exactly as you say, which is when you look at the smallest of interpersonal situations. You and I sat across this table from each other right now. If you're listening to this, out there in listener land, you and your partner, you and your kids sat across the table of an evening. The dynamics that are at play there. Someone asks you a question and you answer it. Then in that moment, there's a space for you to be truthful or not. The exact same dynamics that in that moment influence whether what comes out of your mouth next is true or not, are the exact same forces that are at play when a politician assembles a party and decides what are we going to take to the next election, when a CEO sits down in front of their shareholders, when a manager at work has a conversation with it. Regardless of the scale we're talking about, these are the same forces that are at play. And that's because ultimately telling the truth is a behavior. You're either doing it or you're not. And so it's subject to the exact same forces. And so for instance, we were talking before about how this notion of is something easy or not is such a great driver of behavior. One of the best drivers of whether people lie is lying easy. Like, is telling the truth easy or is telling the truth hard? And we constantly put people in situations where telling the truth is impossibly difficult. That they know they will be judged for it. They know that this is why I'd love to hear some of your reflections on those decisions around back after the break. That like the kind of decisions that were made at every moment. You were making these choices to be truthful, and I imagine
to write that book
in writing the book and in because you had so many choices along the way where you could have chosen to not be honest. And I can't imagine it was easy to make the choice to do so. But we constantly put people in positions where you basically have to be a saint, to be honest, where the entire deck is encouraging you it's stacked to make you lie. And those forces apply on that interpersonal level. Why? I lie to my husband because I'm worried he's going to judge me if I tell the truth. I lie to my wife because I'm scared of what she'll say if I tell the truth. These exact same forces are at play on every level.
So if we were to put it in some sort of formula that someone who really should have taken maths in the beer garden but didn't, was too full of ego and took maths 1, which I then failed at. If some sort of equation, would it be that if if we're going to if then, if telling the truth causes more risk, then a lie is going to happen.
Yeah.
Or if telling the lie causes more risk, the truth is going to happen.
To a first approximation, I'd say that is exactly the formula. And so my argument would be, we can often be disappointed that people lie in a situation. We can be frustrated, we can be upset, we can be angry. We should almost never be surprised, because it's almost always happening. If you read a bit of human factors stuff, when they're talking about like plane crashes, they'll be like, you got to understand that like we're in systems that make certain outcomes inevitable. And in that situation, I think people find themselves in a lot of spots where lying feels almost inevitable. It's like you can't expect someone to tell the truth if keeping their job requires them to lie. It's just too big a hurdle to get over. And so I think one of the challenges we face as a society is, how do we make truth easier? How do we make it not feel like that almost Judeo-Christian virtue ethics style thing of, well, if it's not hard, it's not worthwhile. It's kind of meant to be hard because hard things are worthwhile. I'm like, no. We should just make telling the truth as easy as humanly possible for people. And it's much more likely to happen, which is itself not an easy ask.
I'm going to try and delicately weave my decades of reality television experience into seeing if this can work as a way to go forward. When I worked on a dating show franchise by the name of The Bachelor, we did many different versions of it, but sometimes you would get people showing up and they perhaps didn't feel that who they were was enough, and so they, in casting or whatever, they would be one person, and they would jump out a limo and be someone different.
Wow.
And my EP, she was extraordinary, would kind of, is usually the blokes.
Okay.
When we started doing Bachelorette, which is, so we did 2, one boy, many women, and we did the other one, which is one woman, many boys, and we did one which was two women, well, one woman and boys and women, which was first in the world, was great.
Yeah. I watched all those, by the way.
She would take this particular boy, man, man, boy, they were really sometimes. She would take this particular man aside and say, I get it, I know what you're trying to do. You could probably do this and keep it up for about 2 days.
Yeah, well.
All right. After 2 days, you're going to start forgetting the things you told them. You're going to start forgetting what you told everybody. Yeah. And it's just going to become so hard. And you're not an actor. So it's going to be, you won't think you're coming across as sus and untrustworthy, but you'll be sus and untrustworthy. It's easier to just be you, and they can take you or leave you.
I'm having quite a physical reaction hearing that, because I just think, I mean, the context of the Bachelor or Bachelorette, that makes so much sense to me, that someone would want to do that or would feel compelled to do that. And there's all sorts of other, they want to be on the telly, they want to do a good job. That, it makes total sense. But I think we'd be lying if we didn't say that we all had a little bit of that going on every single day.
Oh yeah, oh fuck, no, come on, like your partner doesn't see the grim bits until after the pants ahoy time is gone. All right, when you're not. When you actually stop rooting and start talking, that's when they find out.
The most dangerous period in a relationship.
Oh yeah, because then they find out about. Oh right, I'm probably going to have to remind them to take the bin out every time. Yeah. Because this is me particularly. He just gets so focused on the things in front of him. Yeah. It's not that he doesn't want to take the bin out; he just has forgotten. Yeah. It's just not on top of his mind. It's not because he's not wanting to do his part. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have. Can I live with that?
Yeah, but in both of those situations, the same, I think, driver of that. I think a lot of people would maybe use the word inauthenticity to describe those moments. And authenticity is a tricky word, I think, and a little bit overused in some contexts. But insofar as it's useful there, like that notion of I feel like I'm having to put on a performance here, is, I think, in the overwhelming majority of circumstances, it's a fear response. It's the fear of, but if I show you who I really am, but what if they tell me I'm no good? What if they say, get out of here, kid? I just don't think I could take that sort of rejection. I just saw the Back to the Future musical. It's that notion of if I show you who I really am, you might not like that. And that's probably the most vulnerable position a person could be put in. And so that question, right, is how do you make it easy in that situation for that person to be themselves? And I imagine in the confines of a production of a reality TV show like The Bachelor, it might be an impossible ask in that situation. But I think insofar as there are tools available, the best tool we've got is psychological safety. I think that the creation of a space where people feel as though what I do next won't lead to judgment. It won't lead to me being cancelled. Like, that if what happens next is indeed honesty, and that's met with empathy and love and understanding and acceptance, that's the precondition to make truth happen in that moment, which I think puts enormous burden on us to think about the role we play in shaping environments that affect other people's honesty. Because it's really easy for us to all sit around and go, oh, that person lies all the time. And, you know, my team are full of shit. And my bosses are always full of crap. And it's like, that could absolutely be true. And these are important conversations and certainly important politically. In the last presidential election, 3% of Donald Trump's statements were true, right? From fact checking, 3%. Only 12% of Kamala Harris's. So it's really important to have that conversation. But I think for most of us on a daily basis, if we can turn the magnifying glass inwards a little bit and go, how is the way that I am showing up in this moment affecting the chances that the people around me will be honest or not? Am I creating safety? Like, that's, especially in personal relationships, I think that's where the real magic can happen. Yeah.
I had identified, I don't know, it was about 19 or so, that a combination of crushingly low self-esteem and as yet undiagnosed all kinds of neurodivergence led me to confabulating and creating a magical world which didn't sometimes exist. And it had, existed through primary school and some of high school. And I started to understand, like, this is affecting me. I'm just going to have to stop doing this. And they were either lies by omission or just making up something to be a bigger night or a better time than it was.
Did you get external? What led you to the moment of kind of going, this isn't working for me? Or I was
noticing my personal friendships were starting to degrade. Okay. And, in show business, you don't get hired again. You don't get fired in show business. You just don't get called again. Yeah, right. So I was noticing, like, not getting invited to parties and things like this. So I was like, I'm going to have to do something here. Maggie Dent talks about just be a good enough parent. Like, if you can get it right 30% of the time, you're doing, that's what a kid needs, which is a lot of margin for error because everyone's making it up. In the course of our day, there's going to be a time when we are truthful, and I'm truthful to you, but then, to be really honest, might derail a conversation. Like, you don't need to hear about, how are you today? I'm okay. I'm not going to give you the full answer. It's going to fuck the whole next hour of our lives, right?
Yeah.
There's times when we are not being truthful by omission for the social situation to continue. You said earlier, we're going to tell a lie about once every 20 minutes. What kind of percentage of truth to lie is one that we can be cool with? Because I do it. I've done it already in this conversation. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you where, but I have.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to go back and listen to this and be like, I think that was the bit that was full of shit.
That's fine.
It was the bit where I said, I'm happy to have you here. No. I'll
tell you exactly what the lie was. The lie was being obtuse about which particular season of Bachelor it was. I told you only the information you needed to know. I didn't give you the name of the executive producer. I told you just what you needed to know to understand.
Yeah.
All right. I wasn't being completely truthful, but I gave you what you needed to get the idea.
Oh, so can we use that then as the
Please.
example?
Yeah.
That's a brilliant example, because and I don't get the sense you're sat here beating yourself up for it, but I would say that's not a situation where that's like a behavior we need to remediate or something, right? I think that's fine. That's totally fine. So there's do you remember this is like going back nearly 20 years now, but I think it was Stephen Colbert had this idea of the scale of truthiness.
Oh, yes.
Brought up on one, and he just said it as
Before he did a Tonight Show, he was a character.
Yeah.
What, like, the analogy would be like a late night guy on Sky News in Australia.
Yeah.
He played that character on
Yeah.
television. Sometimes the guests on the show didn't understand it was a character, or people maybe didn't realize he was being pretend. But yes.
And that's when it always ran best, I think,
yeah.
when the guests just are like, "Is this real? I think this is real."
Yeah. You only get one shot. He only got one shot of those, but they were always very good.
Yeah, once everyone knows Ali G's shtick, the gig is up. So he had this idea of he coined this term of truthiness, and he did it as a satirical thing. But in the book, I was like, I think this is a useful idea, so I kind of took it and fleshed it out. I think there's a much. I don't think it's just a binary truth and lies. I think there's a scale of this stuff. And to use the withholding the exact EP's name, which season The Bachelor was, a kind of example, I think a lot of it comes down to what the intent is in the moment where you're deciding what to share and what not to share, in terms of what's problematic and what isn't. So at one end, you've got truth, which is just people literally recounting facts as they are. And at the other end, you've got lies, which is the opposite of that. People being full of shite. But then in the middle, I think there's two very important gradations. So next to truth, we've got positioning, right? Which is the act of deciding which parts of the truth we're going to include or exclude. The phrasing we're going to use, because we don't just walk around simply stating the facts as they are all the time. How are you? I am... like my left knee's sore, my right elbow, as we walked in this morning, is like I got out of bed today and hurt myself. Like we don't just walk around saying the truth all the time, including things like, it's nice to see you. Really? Because I don't feel the same way. It's like, it's not that nice to see you at all. So then there's positioning, which is deciding what we're going to share. But positioning, I think, is presenting a version of the facts that doesn't lead people to conclusions that are in opposition with the facts, right? So it doesn't, you're not attempting to mislead me in any way when you selectively share what you shared about the Bachelor story, right?
No.
It's
I am being true. I am, to be honest, I'm protecting myself against an NDA that I signed and protecting people's work who are still in the industry and still do that job.
Yeah, which sounds like a pretty good idea to me. And I should.
It's more, I give less shits about the NDA, more shits about the producer.
Yeah, which is a very pro-social thing to do. And so you go, okay, so in that situation, am I leading someone to conclusions that are knowingly false? No.
Yeah.
Is it material to understanding the situation? No. And so I just think that's a perfectly fine act of positioning. You then get to the bit that's beside it that isn't quite outright lying. So you got truth, then you got positioning, then you got spin. And this is one of the gray areas where I think we make choices every day, which is I'm going to selectively edit, like I'm doing positioning. I'm going to include things, I'm going to exclude things, but I'm knowingly leading you to a false conclusion, right? So it's normally through sin of omission. The way I present data, the way I tell this story, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to explicitly say something I know to be false, but I am going to I'm going to knowingly lead you to a false conclusion. And I think when the scale tips over into that, that's where things tend to get very problematic.
For example, like at an annual general meeting, a CEO of a company standing up and showing a big graph that's going up and to the right and how amazing this is. There's a whole slide on the deck that shows the employee churn rate, that people leave less than 3 months after getting hired, and they are just flat out keeping people in the door. But I'm not going to show you that part.
Yeah.
That's a fundamental white ant danger town in a company, but I'm not going to show you that bit.
Yeah.
Because it will degrade away from this big graph that goes up and to the right. How exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And they can honestly stand their hand on heart and say, well, I didn't lie.
Yeah.
I just didn't tell you the full story.
Yeah.
And they've kind of done what you did, but not really, right? Because their intent is to knowingly lead you to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's where the distinction, I think, becomes really important. There's a great article who is saying that when we reduce the bar to simply not lying, it's too low a bar to fall over. Like, and this was one of the things that I think became very clear in writing the book, is that we talk about truth and lies in very different ways. So when people talk about lying, particularly when researchers study it, they study it behaviorally. So they're like, what are the conditions under which people lie? What makes people lie? Why do they lie? When researchers study truth, not all the time, but very, very often, they do it conceptually. It's all philosophical. What is truth? Who owns truth? And it's almost like, well, lying is a behavior. Truth is a concept. And the argument that I make is it's actually not that simple. Telling that truth isn't what happens when you remove the lies. Truth is its own behavior, right? You have to find the right words to say. You have to lean into discomfort. There's all these things you need to get good at in order to get good at telling the truth. If you remove the lies, you're not automatically left with truth. You might be left with spin. You might be left with sins of omission. You might be left with misunderstanding. The magic isn't just not lying. The magic is finding the way to make truth happen.
We'll get to the behavior of truth and how we can get that into ourselves in a moment. But as we are speaking, people may listen to this in 5 years. So I will say there's just been a video out maybe 2 weeks ago of Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise fighting on a roof.
Yeah.
And it was created by a Chinese-based video AI generator. And unless you really knew what you were looking for, there's a few things like there's a jacket, there's a shadow in the wrong direction. There's a few tiny little things, but the average, like, it happens so fast, it is so unbelievably exciting. Yeah. You wouldn't know that it's not real. Yeah. How then can we work the behavior of understanding if something's truthful in a world that rapidly is descending into a place of what even is reality?
I would say that's the single most consequential and important question for us to be grappling with right now. I don't think anyone's got a really clear answer to this. The data around how bad we are at telling, real from fake when it comes to AI stuff is truly terrifying. And with each new model, we get worse and worse and worse at it, because it's not the phrase you used of like, the average person can't tell it apart. Highly trained people can't tell it apart. It's terrible. The lack of ability of people to distinguish between fake and real is truly terrifying.
I think it's fairly safe to assume, like, I like to think I'm an educated person.
Yeah.
And I am in acceptance that my little tiny human brain cannot put Instagram down.
Yeah.
I am not powerful enough to outwit this algorithm that is designed to capture me. So I actually have a physical device in my house that I use to RFID to lock my thing out, so I can't open
amazing.
it. Yeah, I'll show you. It's upstairs. It's great.
Super cool.
I think it's fairly safe to assume that, if not already, within a year, no human could be possibly trained to discern or understand. Like, but then what the fuck do we do when it comes to news?
So I think there's two sides to the coin, I think. And the first is what we definitely don't do. And I think this is where every single person listening to this has a role to play. We never accept for an answer that people just need to learn to figure it out. And there are a lot of lobby, particularly tech-funded lobby groups, but there's a lot of people saying, well, this is just an education problem. We just need to train people to be critical thinkers. As you say, we could spend our lives in training. There are teams of neuroscientists and psychologists on the payroll of technology companies being paid to do nothing other than figure out how to beat your brain.
And then put processing power beyond our concepts
at
that. So even if we could get around the variable reward thing, it happens so fast and so powerfully we can't overcome it.
Exactly. They will hack every available... And so the answer isn't we just educate our way out of it, which I think tells us, it might not give us the answer, but it gives us the category the answer has to fit in, which is we desperately need to accelerate the regulatory regime that sits behind this. Like, we need incredibly strong AI governance. And it needs to be governmental. And I think Julie Inman-Grant, the e-safety commissioner, has done some extraordinary, really world-leading work in Australia around some of this. The social media ban, for all of its frailties, and it is a deeply, deeply imperfect thing, I think is a hugely important step in the right direction. And it's worth, for people out there on the fence about the social media ban, it's worth knowing that none of the tech bros that run these companies let their kids use social media. All of their kids are off social media because they know it's terrible. They're just happy to let your kids use it. But yeah, so I think, so governance is one really important thing. But I think the thing that individuals can do, I don't think we can ever think that we're going to be armed with the tools to tell fake from fact, but there's two individual behaviors we can do. So one is, speaking to your RFID behavior, we can connect less. And so I think there is a certain part of exposure here, right? It's just the more time you spend on social media that is now increasingly just filled with algorithmically and AI generated content, the more exposure, you're just getting exposed to it more and more often. So we can disconnect. And the second thing we do is there is one very active step that people take, which is sharing. So we might not be able to tell the difference between fake and real very well, but we can absolutely exercise control over what we share or not. And right now, the bar typically for what we hit like on or share is very, very low. If it kind of hits our reticular activating system, if we get a little emotional kick out of it, a lot of us share reflexively. I think if we can learn to set the bar very high for what we're willing to share, with the notable exception of links to this podcast, which should be shared everywhere by everyone all the time. But I think if we can at least try to take responsibility, we might be a misinformation super consumer, but we don't have to be an information super spreader.
Right.
And I think if we can set the bar higher for that, we can maybe start to exercise a little more control over that.
We talked earlier about the same mechanisms which create the environment for a lie or a truth being introduced into a situation occur at a one-on-one level, all the way to a company, to a government level, which leads me to think then, so my bullshit detector that has been trained on one-on-one is probably also useful at a larger level. How then? How do I stop getting into? Well, of course, Dom would say that. Like, how do I not slip over skepticism and wanting to verify into, I'm not going to believe anything you tell me, whatever, and reframing everything that comes out of your mouth as justification for why I am, now I'm, falling into conspiracies. Because which is an easy pathway. It's easy to get down there because it's all very convincing and feels really real.
Yeah. That's an incredibly fine line. I think the line between, so I discuss it as it's the line between kind of skepticism and cynicism. This kind of, I need to engage my critical faculties to evaluate it, but I don't want to just fall into that spot of, well, I'm never going to believe anything you tell me. So as much as possible, having a tendency towards separating message and messenger can be really useful. So the thing that we need to guard against in the way that we engage with the world around us is, I don't know, this will be very, very familiar territory to you, is this notion of cognitive dissonance, right? That when we get presented with information that conflicts with our view of the world, we're more likely to reject the fact than change our minds. And a lot of that's self-protective, right? We have this deep desire to protect our existing way of understanding the world and protect the way we show up and protect our in-group who all believes the same thing. And so it's a very hard thing to fight against. But I think the more we can try to default towards evaluating message on its merits rather than messenger, the better, with one very notable exception, which is when the messenger has a very well-established track record of not being trustworthy. The question I think we can learn to ask ourselves is, on what grounds is my lack of belief coming? Because if your lack of belief is coming from, well, I've kind of done as much research as can be expected of any one person, and I simply disagree with this on the basis of the facts, then that's probably one of the better reasons for disagreement. If your point of disagreement is coming from, I don't like this guy, that's not evidence, but it's a cue to be like, well, maybe I need to give this another shot.
Right.
Maybe it is worth listening to this or exploring this. So I think developing so the very short answer, let me land that plane. The very short answer would be when presented with something that conflicts with our view of the world and our instincts again, we go, that's rubbish. I think learning to take that as a cue to ask yourself a question of, on what grounds do I think that's rubbish? And if your genuine, honest answer is because I kind of done my homework and I think that's about right, then great. But if your answer is, I don't really like that guy, if that were true, and especially if your answer is, well, if that were true, I'd really have to rethink a lot of my stuff. Those are great reasons to not immediately dismiss something, I think.
Talk to me about, like we talked about cynicism and skepticism, and that it's more healthy to be skeptical than to be cynical. But there's also the fact that two things can be true, right? As there's a great book by a guy called Hans Rosling called Factfulness. And his line was, when you look at the data, things are bad, but they're getting better. How can we make space to hold the idea of, yes, we really need to transition the energy as quickly as possible, and we can't turn off coal today. As much as I want it to happen, we can't do both.
That's a beautiful question, right? Because this is, it would just be so simple if there was just one true thing and all we had to do was agree that. But as we like to say sometimes, that the challenge is all the truth arrives at the same time, right? And there's going to be lots of things that's true. I think there's a couple of ways we can navigate that. So one of them is, and I think this is a very helpful place to start, with good intentions, but I think problematically, truth and opinion has started to take on an almost synonym. Like, we're living in a world where if I believe something strongly enough, I'll even now call it, there's like a phrase everyone uses, right? Well, that's my truth, right? And I think that's a really understandable phrase. And I think in certain particularly therapeutic contexts, that phrase means a lot of things that are really important. And so it's certainly not my intent to, we work a lot in the domestic family violence space, economic abuse space, and in those kind of situations, the notion of doing something that someone might describe as telling my truth is a really important act, and I'm not attempting to invalidate that or anything like that. But the use of the phrase "that's my truth" has people say, well, what they really mean is that's my opinion or that's my belief, and it takes on this property like, well, if I believe it strongly enough, if I hold that opinion deeply enough, it becomes the truth, right? And I think there's a number of reasons why that's problematic. And I also think there's a number of reasons why the phrase, that's my truth, actually could be very insulting to the person who's saying that. Because if you're someone who, let's say, has experienced deep mental illness or domestic and family violence or economic abuse, and you say, this is my truth, and someone else goes, yeah, that's your truth. I'm like, no, it's all of our truth. If you've experienced those things, that's all of our truths. And it's incredibly demeaning to be like, oh, that's just your truth. If you've experienced deep mental trauma, the fact that you've experienced that is my truth too. And I need to grapple with, if it's a relationship, the role I've played in that. We can't just say that's your truth and put it in a little box over there. We need to do better than that. We need to make them shared truths. And so to come back to the middle of the table, the notion of, well, this thing's true and this thing's true. The first thing we do, I think, when we're dealing with a situation where there's multiple truths, is we don't confuse it by adding more things in the disguise of truth, right? So yes, it's true that man-made climate change is real. Yes, it's true that we need to transition away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Yes, it's true that we can't turn off coal tomorrow. Let's just say, for the purpose of this conversation, those three things are true. It's hard enough to deal with that without me also adding, and I've got these 5 little opinions, which for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to say a truth as well.
Workers' rights.
But yeah. It's like, and that's just true.
Recycling solar panels.
Yeah, we kind of pile.
Transmission lines.
Yeah.
Like, fucking hell, man.
It just goes on and on and on and on. And so I think that's the first thing. And then I think so don't add opinions that we're falsely calling truth into the mix. And then the second thing I think we need to be able to do is depersonalize. So I think the effect of this world where if I believe it strongly enough, it becomes quote unquote my truth, is in the presence of debate or disagreement, we can't help but feel like we're under assault. And I think we need to be able to depersonalize this notion of our opinions and our beliefs aren't the truth. Our opinions and our beliefs are about the truth, but they're not themselves the truth. The truth is very much, in the words of the X-Files, out there. I've dated myself with that reference. But although I'm wearing a Fringe Division t-shirt, so I'm not beyond.
I can't even remember. I don't even know what that is. I'm not cool enough.
Or are you too cool? I think
no, I'm not. I'm not cool enough. But it is very uncomfortable, particularly, and I've noticed this recently. When identity gets involved, that can be someone who identifies either as a climate skeptic, for example, or a particular column of society which sees themselves as either by inner or outer ways marginalized. Anything that challenges any fact that challenges that identity is not just well, that's interesting, let me look at that. It's like you're attacking who I am, therefore I will respond with, as if my life depends on it because this is me. And that is a tough thing when you find yourself in that space. It's very difficult to have a conversation to unpick that.
The stakes just get so high.
This is true.
Because now we're not just talking about the science of climate, we're talking about like my personal... my friends I've built around it, and are you calling me an idiot? And
my entire social
network.
network. And this can happen, and we see it, unfortunately, with new parents, particularly around vaccinations. And it, as we speak today, there's a measles outbreak in Sydney, and they don't know where it's coming from. It is a disease that will kill babies or leave children with lifelong brain injury or deafness or blindness, the very least of which, in the most wonderfully terrible, ironic thing, leave that child with their immune system kind of fucked for the rest of their lives. And it's completely preventable by vaccination. And sometimes if you have an outbreak, a dose of the vaccination or 2 doses of vaccination can actually help you get a lot better. How do we have a conversation around the efficacy of vaccine and saving the lives of children that you don't even know? How do we have that conversation when it's so wildly, it's either, for me, mind-bogglingly obvious, or for somebody else, existentially life-threatening?
My heart bleeds at this conversation, because it's even worse, right? It's not that measles is preventable; it's that it was prevented. We were literally, we beat it. We beat it, and now the US is about to lose its measles-free status. 21 out of 27 developed countries, the last 5 years, coverage rates for measles, diphtheria, whooping cough have been going down, not up. 21 out of 27 developed countries. 156 million kids have been saved by vaccination, and now a very much effectively a disease of privilege, of people just deciding that like this isn't a thing now. This is another one of those really consequential questions. And again, it's easy to start with what doesn't work. What doesn't work is making people feel targeted or blamed or like they're horrible people or foolish. We know that doesn't work. We know that hardens their beliefs. Same thing with climate, by the way. The IGPCC found that presenting a climate skeptic with evidence of climate change, the most likely thing it does is deepen their belief that climate change isn't real. So you can't simply argue your way out of it. So there is it's another thing that's discussed. Obviously, vaccination comes up in the context of the book. There's this idea called the social theory of conspiracy. The way that we intuitively think things work is that, so I read something or see something that makes me think that vaccines aren't real, and I develop this view that they're harmful, and so I go and find other vaccine deniers, and my social group is chosen based on my beliefs. The social theory of conspiracy would suggest that actually we choose our group and then we adopt our beliefs to fit in with the group. And so if reason number one that we lie is it's easy, reason number two is to fit in. And we tend to dig in around these identity level beliefs that come to define our groups. I am a vaccine denier. I am a climate skeptic. I'm a flat earther, which, there's like 4 of those, but that is a thing. And so the nature of the intervention to change the view has got to be built with an understanding that people tend to adopt anti-scientific or anti-mainstream beliefs defensively. They do it to protect themselves and protect their in-crowd. And so we need to find ways to approach the conversation that aren't hostile. I have to dig so deep with this personally because I get so angry at this particular class of belief because it's literally this is not, it is killing kids, right? And you can count them in the thousands now. And so I'm having to summon every bit of taking my own advice here of but we can't judge. Depersonalize. It doesn't work. We need to find less hostile ways of reaching across the aisle, but while still preserving the facts of the situation. And there's good teams of people working on it. But right now, I've had the answer to how to improve vaccine coverage. I'm super aware of the fact that I didn't give a really simple "here's the thing that you do," and the answer is that there are policy teams in every developed country working on this, except the ones where the policy teams are now rolling back vaccine mandates. Thank you, RFK Jr. But in most developed countries, there are policy teams working on this, and the answer is no one's figured that out.
Yeah, right.
This seems to be an incredibly intractable, growing counterfactual belief that is really sticky, made even worse by the fact that when you look at the history of it, all this anti-vaccine stuff comes from one guy.
When we talked about smartphones earlier, I didn't think I had a problem. It was like with alcohol, for example, as well. I didn't think I had a problem until my wife and I compared our screen time readouts. And I realized, actually I do.
Woof.
Yeah. How might people listening, people watching, might not realize that there's something in their life they are more holding to be true because of an identity thing, and they are rejecting actual facts around it. How might we find out and be curious about what's going on for us that we might accidentally have found ourselves in one of these spaces, whether it be around education or healthcare or relationships, the way you feel women's and men's roles in the world are, for example?
Yeah. This one there is a clear answer to, I think, which is feedback. We think of feedback as something that, I think when most people hear feedback, we think of sitting across the table from someone and having a feedback conversation. But if you just think about feedback as the information you get back from the environment around you, whether it is someone telling you, or in your case, you got feedback from the screen, the usage numbers.
I didn't like it. But it was I couldn't lie.
Well, this is it, right? It's hard for I'm just going to call them bad beliefs or misbeliefs. It's hard for misbelief to survive contact with indisputable evidence, right? So the screen time thing, I get the sense that when you looked at it, you weren't like, well, those numbers are wrong. The numbers are the numbers in that case, and that feedback triggered a huge moment of realization. I think we need to learn to fall in love with feedback, which a lot of people have learned they're meant to, we know we're meant to like feedback. Feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift. It's is it though? If you walk in the front door and your wife's like, honey, I've got some feedback for you, I'm not sure everyone's like, oh, excellent. What a gift this is going to be. So despite the fact that we've learned we're meant to like feedback, I think most of us still continue to fear it a lot. But without a doubt, when it comes to almost that self-audit of where is the problem that I've got that I don't know is a problem, where is the problem I've got that I kind of do know is a problem, but I'm not quite willing to admit it or talk about it, the right feedback delivered from the right place at the right time, I think, is the entry point into those conversations.
And that could be something like I discussed earlier, I'm getting not invited to a lot of things that I hear about afterwards. Yeah. What might be going on here? Or when I have a conversation with people at school pickup or drop off or whatever, it's particularly prickly when I talk about this thing or that with more people than it isn't. Wonder if that's me. Just being curious about that.
Yeah, lovely. I was going to say that's a curiosity thing, right? And because it would be really easy, that pickup one's such a good example, Osh, because the it would be really easy for you to play out that exact same scenario, but the last sentence isn't. I wonder what that's telling me about me. The last sentence is, aren't these people dickheads?
Right.
Which is defensiveness, and the lack of curiosity. And so it came so naturally to you, but I feel like maybe that's born from years of really hard work, is learning to be curious in those moments.
And also the space I was given by selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors to slow some of those initial reactions down. Those reactions still happen, don't get me wrong, but I know to go, I notice when that flood happens, I go, wow, there it is. And I try not to speak from it. Don't always make it, but sometimes it does happen. We talked about that lying as a behaviour, the idea, what's the word I'm looking for? The academic idea that lying is a behaviour, but the truth is a concept. You talk about developing truth as a behaviour.
Yeah.
What are some ways that we can, in ourselves and call for in people in power, what are some ways that we can develop truth as a behaviour?
Yeah, beautiful. So I think I'd say there's 3 acts. You gotta have this debater in me. You'll never get rid of. There's always going to be 3. So the 3 acts I think we can do are seeking, speaking, and hearing. And so by seeking the truth, I think this is curiosity, and so that is defaulting to a situation where you learn to ask yourself the question, I wonder if that's true. So I think often our first reflexive response in situations is to levy a judgment, or to be in some way judgmental. I think reconditioning ourselves so our first response is to display curiosity. And I think the question that we ask ourselves is, I wonder if that's true. That question is incredibly powerful to learn to ask reflexively. And I think that's the human characteristic of like seeking the truth. Then there's speaking it. And I think the human quality we need to cultivate there is courage. So making an individual commitment that as best as possible, the things I'm going to say with the intent of preserving the truth. And maybe that starts with working in those moments to cut out the bald-faced lies, and then working gradually through spin and up towards positioning up the scale of truth in us. But I think committing to, on an individual level, as best as possible, making sure the things we say, the things we share, are in alignment with the facts as we know them, including the most important phrase to fall in love with, which is, I don't know. If people were just willing to say, I don't know, way more often, I just think half of this problem would go away. And then the third one is hearing it, which gets back to this notion that when we're presented with a point of view, a perspective, a fact, a belief, an opinion that contradicts our view of the world, the natural human tendency is to dismiss it. And the more personal that truth is, the more that kicks in as a defensive posture. And so I think if seeking the truth is all about curiosity and speaking the truth is all about courage, I think hearing the truth is all about humility. And it's being humble and vulnerable enough in any given situation to understand that it simply might be the case that you're wrong about stuff. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you an idiot. I live my life in a perpetual state of being wrong about everything all the time. But mustering up that humility and that vulnerability to understand that to be open to hearing the truth, especially personal ones, I think are the 3 qualities. So you basically get seeking, speaking, and hearing the truth, and the human qualities of curiosity, courage, and humility. And I think if we can cultivate those things, the chances, we are fighting forces that make this very difficult, and we've talked about some of them already. AI is a big one. But I think if we can cultivate those acts and those qualities, I think we get ourselves in a position where we're much more likely to make truth happen, individually and organizationally and societally.
From a leadership perspective, there's an extraordinary chapter of the book. I mean, it would take another 2 hours to go through it right now. But there's an extraordinary chapter of the book that pretty much note for note demonstrates how a leader of many, many people can very openly admit a huge amount of fault and end up more respected as a leader on the other side. And it's an incredibly, I'm sure you had a lot of conversations about, is it cool if I write about this? Because some of it's very intimate and personal and a bit intense. Yeah. But it would be wonderful to have more of our leaders understand that. And, we're always news organisations have to make money, so they do have to point fingers at the thing that's wrong. So, but also to allow our leaders that level of space and acceptance of their humanity. Of course, they've never been in charge of this size of a thing before, and they're a human like anybody else. I'm fascinated to see. This is an incredible opportunity for a leader in our country to stand up and demonstrate something like what you're talking about, something about like, here's some feedback, here's some honesty. I'm not going to resign because I am going to own this, and I'm going to show you what it is to own it and not know it. I don't think it's going to happen, but it will show up at some point. We will see it very publicly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets back to that, the conversation we had earlier about the role we all play in this, right? And social media is just making us the very worst conceivable versions of ourselves, because it's amping up the emotional stakes. Obviously, we know that social media drives people towards much more extreme and visceral views. And so now, if the problem that we face is one of the reasons leaders won't stand up in the way that Pete from the book did, and literally just share all of his negative feedback with everyone, which is the case that you refer to. The reason that most leaders won't do that is they'll get crucified for doing it. And we all have some accountability for that, right? Every time we throw out a tweet or an X, or post on Insta, or share something on Facebook, or comment in the comment section of a thing with something super aggressive and hostile, we are fueling an environment that makes the notion of honestly admitting you've got a mistake borderline career suicide. And this is what I mean by we can be frustrated that the leader of the unnamed supermarket chain won't do it. We can be annoyed that they won't do it. We can pull our hair out, but we cannot be surprised, because we are complicit in creating a world where the stakes for being honest are cancellation and being pilloried. And it's like, put yourself in their shoes. Would you do it? Would you? I'm like, I like to think I would. I wrote the literal fucking book on truth, and I'm not sure that I'd do it. I did, because we ask so much of them. And so my big question is, how do we make that easier? And I think it starts with the way that we choose to respond in those moments. Because to go back to something that I've heard you talk about, again, very compellingly, I have no control over the CEO of a supermarket. I have massive control over my response in that moment. And if we could just de-escalate this conversation, I think we'd find environments where truth is much more likely to flourish.
I like the idea that we have some agency in it. That we have. I can't change that in the first 40 days of Donald Trump's presidency. I think it's 47, like more than one a day, very truly unverifiable things he has stated and acted on. I can't change that.
Yeah.
All right. I can control how I react to it, because the way I react to it changes the way I am with my family, changes my enjoyment of my life. I'm not nihilistic. I'm not resigned.
Yeah.
There's action I can take, but I try my best to not allow that to, divert me, which I kind of think is kind of the whole idea. And having a commitment to finding a shared truth, even with someone you disagree with, has got to be something that we really focus on. And that truth can start with the other person I'm speaking to is a human who has thoughts and feelings and favourite food and a favourite episode of, Scooby-Doo or whatever, and, we possibly like some of the same things. And finding that truth first is got to be the way that we and just commit to it.
Yeah.
We have to commit to it, because otherwise we are fucked.
Yeah, it's like one of my friends is a UN negotiator, and
Natch
talks about this idea that it doesn't matter. We're talking about like, let's put the North Koreans and the South Koreans in a room and see what happens, right? So this is one of the guys that does that sort of thing. And it's like, it doesn't matter how far apart the sides are. You can't get anywhere until you find the thing you agree on. You have to find something that feels like common ground. And I think one of the issues with the way that there's been this subtle but insidious shift in the last 15 years of politics, of it used to be, I think, maybe this is a little bit longing for the glory days that never quite were like this, but I do think this has some truth in it. It used to be the fact that different side of politics kind of just felt like they had different ways of getting at the same shared goal, you know. But now we literally talk about them like they're the enemy, and it's like we have political advisors who tell their candidates that they're not your opposition, they're your enemy, and the goal isn't to win. The goal is just to beat them, and it's like that there's no. It's like, and I think that ethic makes the notion of shared progress almost impossible. But it's hard to reach across the aisle like that, and especially in a world where all the technology is fueling us in a way where it's putting us in emotionally heightened, angry, upset states where it's so hard to do that.
To build on something you said before, it's easier to win an election by saying over 1,000 times, "I'm not that guy."
Yeah.
Versus, "Look at these great ideas."
Yeah.
It's much easier to win it by just saying what you're not, and it takes a lot less effort.
Yeah.
It's much easier and far more emotive. Yet this is the system we've got. It's not perfect, but this is what we are. This is a great book, man. Thanks for writing it.
Oh, thank you for
really
reading
good.
it. That means a lot.
And I'm grateful that people like you exist in the world, because God damn it, we need you.
Well, I mean, right back. That's extremely kind of you to say,
Thanks,
but the feeling is very much mutual.
Oh, all right, we've got to get out of here. Thank you so much for coming around, Dom.
Mate, thank you for having me.